And the next speaker will be February 26th. It will be Carolyn Finney of UC Berkeley. So there are a number of interesting talks. I see one of the other speakers is in faculty. And I encourage you to come. Well, tonight's speaker is our very own Arne Jacobson. Arne is a professor in the Environmental Resources Engineering Department and the director of the Schatz Energy Research Center. He has a bachelor's degree from Toronto College in physics. He got his master's right here at HSU. And he has a PhD from the Energy and Resources Group at UC Berkeley. And he's going to be speaking tonight on the Pico Power Revolution off-grid energy services for low-income people in Africa, Asia, and beyond.
Thanks. Thank you, Peter. And just as a point of starting, I want to mention that the work that I'm presenting is very much collaborative work. It's work that involves well over 10 people based here at Humboldt State, including staff at the Schatz Energy Research Center and students. It involves collaborators from the International Finance Corporation and World Bank, dozens and dozens of people, some based in Washington, D.C., some based in Nairobi, some based in New Delhi, Dhaka, Addis Ababa, a number of places around the world. And it also involves collaboration with a number of companies and users, a whole range of people. So this is work that represents efforts of hundreds of people. It is, for me, an area that's really exciting to get to study. It's work that, for me, dates back to the early 90s, or interests that date back to the early 90s. And I feel it's really a privilege to get to have my research work be in this arena. Just as a starting point, really, it's been the last 5 years that there's just been this explosion of the use of what I call, or what many people are calling now, Pico power or Pico solar devices in both sub-Saharan Africa and in South Asia. And this can be represented in some ways by a rapid increase in sales of these products. But also can be talked about in lots of other ways. And so just as a starting point, I want to introduce what it is I'm talking about when I'm talking about these devices. And so a Pico solar device might be something as small as this. This is a very small solar light. It's got a solar module on this side. It's an LED light. Can be used as a reading light. I think this particular one just has one light setting, just on or off. It has a battery embedded in here, electronics. And this sells in Kenya on a retail basis for $8 or $9. And this is a replacement for a small kerosene lamp. This is sort of the lower cost end of the types of products that I would consider to be good quality, durable products that are solar powered. So this is the small end of these Pico power devices. There are others. They cost a little bit more. They provide maybe longer lighting service or do other things. This is one example. Another small reading lamp. There are products like this one, maybe cost more like $35. Has a small solar module. It's a portable light, multiple light settings. This one looks like it's not charged, but also can charge a mobile phone. And so some of the products do more than just provide lighting. And then there are, you can move on to somewhat larger systems. They're still really small by conventional solar standards. You might have solar modules that are 3 or 5 or 7 watts, but they might be able to power 2, 3, 4 lights and still charge a mobile phone, maybe power a radio. And so these are the kinds of systems that I'm talking about. They're fairly small. They might range in cost from $7 or $8 up to maybe $150, and provide lighting services, mobile phone charging, and maybe some other small-scale power for small-scale applications. So you're not going to power a microwave. You're not going to run your toaster with these. You can't run your irrigation pump, but you can get very small amounts of power to improve the level of lighting service and the level of service for some other things. And the sales of these things are skyrocketing. And so what I want to talk about today are mainly two things. One is what are the main drivers for this trend? Why is this happening? What's going on here? And I'll spend most of the time talking about that. But I'm also interested in another question, which is, can somewhat larger systems, solar power systems, become affordable in the same way? So something that might provide more lighting service or power other applications or other appliances that people might be interested in, can those also become affordable and more widely used in the same way that these Pico power devices are becoming? So that's where I'll spend most of my time. Before I do that, I'm going to do just a little bit of background and do that over the next few slides, and then dive into these key questions. So I thought it was useful just to start off with a little bit of a geography of this industry. And you'll see that I have three dots here, a blue one that shows where the main manufacturing centers are for these devices, a grayish box or a bubble that shows where company headquarters are located, and then a red dot that shows where key markets are for sales of these products. So any guesses about manufacturing? China, a good guess. Most of the manufacturing of these devices takes place in China, but not all of it. So China is the primary manufacturing center. India, I would say, is the second most common manufacturing center, not nearly as big as China in terms of total volume of production for these devices, but still quite significant. And then there are the other dots I'm going to make much smaller because there's some degree of assembly and manufacturing in other places around the world, but on a much smaller scale. Just one company here and one company there, or maybe even just assembly, a portion of one company's activity. A few places in sub-Saharan Africa, there's a little bit of assembly that takes place in the United States for some companies. There's some in Europe. I think one company has a factory in Thailand, another one in Jakarta, Indonesia, etc. But most of it is in China, and not just in China, but in the Shenzhen, that southern part of China where so much of the manufacturing takes place. In terms of the company headquarters, companies are manufacturing these devices, but they're not all based in China. Europe and the United States are where most of the companies are headquartered, but there are a number of companies that are headquartered also in India, in China. There are some Taiwanese companies. There are some that are based in Japan and Korea. There's one of the leading companies is based in Australia. So there's a variety of different places these companies are headquarters. One of them is in South Africa. So fairly spread out, but quite a lot of activity in Europe, the United States, and China and India. Then markets. Markets, primary sales and primary use of these devices are in sub-Saharan Africa, especially in East Africa. Those are the most the greatest use of these products so far are in countries like Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Ethiopia, but also to some degree in a number of other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. A little bit of use in the Americas, not very much comparatively, but little bits here and there, and then quite a bit also in South Asia. India is certainly the largest Asian country in terms of use, but also Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Cambodia, and some other countries as well. And so manufacturing mostly coming from China and India, use mostly in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. and company headquarters all over, but especially in the US, Europe, and China and India. And so if you think about trying to engage with this industry, I spend a fair bit of time in East Africa and South Asia, but I also spend a bunch of time engaging with manufacturers around the world, with financial industry partners in a number of different places, et cetera. So it's geographically a very spread. I end up getting stretched across space in terms of trying to engage with this, with what's going on. Partly in travel, but also in telephone calls. This is my second talk today. I gave one that started at 7 a.m. just because we were trying to accommodate a lot of time zones. It was a webinar. Okay, so the need for energy in the off-grid sector is quite large. About 1.3 billion people globally don't have access to electricity. Most of those people are in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia. Well over 90% of people who don't have access to the grid are on one of those two continents. Latin America, Middle East, and OECD countries, the numbers are far, far smaller. And so naturally, a lot of the attention and a lot of the activity is in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia. In terms of lighting, the incumbent technology is fuel-based lighting. Lamps like this one, a kerosene lamp, or even this one, which is also a kerosene lamp, but much cruder. These cost about 10 cents for the light, but once you start paying for the fuel, it adds up. This is more like a $8, $7 lamp, and it's a much nicer lamp if you're going to go with kerosene than the other one. That's the incumbent technology, and kerosene lighting is more than a $20 billion industry globally. People spend a lot of money on kerosene lighting, and they don't get that much lighting service for it. The efficacy in terms of the energy and the fuel to the amount of light that you get out for that is extremely small. It's a really inefficient way of producing light. That's the incumbent technology on the lighting side, and mobile phone use is also a really important application of electricity for people in off-grid areas. And people typically, if they don't have access to the grid, end up having to pay to have their mobile phone charged. People in Kenya typically pay 25 cents per charge and might have to do this 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more, depends on their use levels. And 25 cents is what you pay if you have a basic mobile phone. If you have a smartphone, it's a little more. Because it's more energy. Prices vary by country. In India, the price is a bit lower, more like on the order of 10 cents. So it varies across countries. But in any case, if people are able to use a solar device to charge their phones, they're saving quite a bit of money just in the mobile phone charges, or charging fees. These systems can provide people with quite a few benefits. Part of it has to do with just improved lighting service. The quality of light, even from a really small lamp like this, is quite a bit better than light from something like this. Partly in terms of the amount of light, but also the quality of the light. I don't know how many of you have tried to read either for extended periods of time, either with a lamp like this or with a candle. What's your impression of that? It flickers. So the flicker, partly it's dim, but the flicker is also a big deal because that eye strain is linked to your eye constantly having to adjust to all of those flickers. So even if you're only producing a similar amount of light with something like this, the fact that it doesn't flicker is a significant benefit. Anything else you noticed? Go ahead.
The circumference of the light
is smaller compared
to one of the.
And it's also like if you have a small lamp compared to the light that's on top, it gives off more.
Mm-hmm. So just the just the amount of light is less.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's not directed where you want it. If you're trying to read here, the candle is here or whatever. It's not that much light is actually reaching what you're trying to look at. People are going
all over the place. Yeah. Other comments? Yep. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, especially the flicker, and it's also very sooty. And in kerosene it's sooty, but you also are if you have to sit really close to the lamp, you're inhaling that soot, but you're also inhaling just the fumes that are evaporating from the lamp itself. So you're being exposed to all of that at the same time. So there's a higher quality light. Some of these products also will charge a mobile phone, and that's a nice benefit as well. There are a number of health benefits associated with the transition away from kerosene. These pictures are fairly dramatic, but which is on purpose. But I don't think where I think that level of drama is warranted given the impacts of kerosene. Kerosene is the #1 leading cause of poisoning in sub-Saharan Africa, and it has to do with accidental ingestion of kerosene by infants or toddlers, especially. It's once young children are able to be mobile, and that's because kerosene is frequently stored in soda bottles, and it doesn't look quite like Coke, but it's kind of a yellowish color. It looks like something you might be able to drink. And if you take a drink of that, you figure it out pretty quickly that wasn't something you should be drinking. But that little swig, the fumes, it's not so much in your digestive system, it's in your lungs. So you get a form of chemical pneumonia. And that's what these children are suffering from. And it's the single largest source of poisoning in sub-Saharan Africa. Fires from kerosene lamps that tip over are very, very common. The number of injuries, deaths, and property loss associated with kerosene fires, especially in small or dense settlements where those fires can spread from one house to another, are a major issue. And then there are other health problems. This picture shows people who have been injured by exploding lamps. And exploding lamps are a big issue in countries like Nigeria, where kerosene is not subsidized, but petrol or gasoline is subsidized. And so some of the sellers of kerosene will mix gasoline in because it's cheaper. They'll adulterate the kerosene and then sell it at the kerosene price to people. And so then you have this mixture of gasoline, which is much more volatile than kerosene, in these lamps, and the volatiles from the gasoline will result in a lamp that'll explode. And when it explodes, the burns are just horrendous. And so these are people who have been injured by exploding lamps. And that's not a problem in Kenya because gasoline is not subsidized. So it's really just in certain countries where that's a major issue. But in those places, it's significant. And then, of course, the air quality issues are quite significant. So there are major health benefits associated with the transition away from this type of lighting. And then there are also global warming related benefits, both from avoided carbon dioxide, although that's fairly small from not burning this kerosene. But more importantly, these little wick lamps are one of the most efficient producers of black carbon soot on the planet. If you're burning kerosene in one of these lamps, 7% of the mass of the original fuel gets converted into black carbon particulates. And black carbon is a significant contributor to climate change. It has strong warming potential. And so these are more efficient than diesel engines, more efficient than many other things that are producing black carbon at generating that black carbon. So getting those types of lamps replaced has a significant global warming avoidance benefit. All right, so that was a bit of background. I want to dive now into this question of what's driving the rapid expansion of use of these Pico solar systems. And I'm going to talk about 5 different things. First is demand. There's high interest for these devices in places like Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia for people who are living in off-grid areas. People feel like these devices are able to provide them with significant high-quality services. So to the degree that they're affordable, people are interested. So demand is a key driver. The second thing is shortcomings of some of the alternative forms of gaining access to modern energy. And I'll talk a bit about that. But things like grid electrification in many places, while it provides a much higher level of service, has been really slow. People have, in many places, have given up on getting access to the grid anytime in their lifetime, just because the process has been so slow. Third, technology innovation, especially for technologies like light-emitting diodes, solar photovoltaics, batteries, and electronic controls. Advances in those technologies have enabled higher performance, lower cost off-grid lighting systems that have been applied in that area. So technology innovation has been critically important. And one thing I think is important to point out is this innovation comes from R&D and investments that had nothing to do with the sector. These are really spillover benefits from investments that are being made to really cater to industrialized country markets. Things like advances in LEDs that are related to thinking about selling into our market for LED lighting products. And photovoltaics have come down in price primarily because of grid-connected PV in US and Europe and Japan and places like that. But there have been spillover benefits for technologies like these ones, and some companies have taken that up and are using those technologies to develop these sorts of devices. Fourth, there have been some very interesting innovations on the business side in terms of sales, marketing, and financing these sorts of systems. And these have played a really important role in what's gone on in the sector. And then fifth, and very importantly, has been the development of institutions that overcome or are intended to overcome market failures. They're fairly significant market failures, especially associated with information asymmetries in many of the countries where these sorts of products are sold. And there have been some efforts to try and address that, and those have been very significant in terms of helping these things to take off. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about each of these, and I'll focus especially on these 3 because I think the first 2 are ones that we can go through pretty quickly. Any questions before I proceed? Y'all with me? Okay. So on the demand side, I'm not going to say that much beyond these are technologies that people see benefit in because they result in improved lighting, they result in improved ability to use communication devices that they care about, and so if these products become affordable to them, they're interested to buy them, and without that demand, of course, none of this would happen. Second is that many of the conventional alternatives for grid electrification or for rural electrification beyond the grid have been either unable to meet many people's needs or unsatisfactory in other ways. So grid-based rural electrification, I'm going to use examples primarily from Kenya. The details of exactly how these things play out vary by country. So I'm using Kenya as an example just because that's one of the places I work the most. But Grid-based rural electrification, these are government-based programs that are funded primarily from external donors. The amount of funding that's available is not enough to even keep up with population growth in Kenya. So there has been some grid electrification, but it's been very slow. Many people have given up on the possibility of getting a grid connection in their lifetime. There has been some acceleration over the last few years, but in general, very slow. And politics get involved in these rural electrification programs, and so if your regional candidate gets elected president, that's great. You might get a grid connection, but if you were favoring the opposition party president, maybe your region doesn't get anything. And so this has been a slow process. Now, of course, everybody wants the grid if they can get it, because what it enables is much, much more than any of these things. But if you don't have any hope, then you're looking for some alternatives. The second thing that people have looked at are standalone mini-grids. Diesel-powered mini-grids have long been around. Solar-powered mini-grids are more common now, or at least on a demonstration level. Hydropower is a possibility if you have the right topography and hydrology. But for the most part, these sorts of systems also depend pretty strongly on donor funding, and they've made a difference in some areas, but lots of people still feel like they're quite far away. In terms of commercial viability, I think mostly not there yet. There's been a lot of advance recently in solar-based mini-grids, but I still think that people are not, those companies are not making money yet, and they're not able to do it without pretty significant amounts of subsidy. Beyond that, solar electrification with small solar home systems, these have, there's been some successes in some markets with these, but in places like Kenya, they've reached what I would call a decent fraction of the rural middle class, but they haven't really been broadly available to a wide swath of the population. And then CFL-based, compact fluorescent lighting-based solar lanterns, which were one of the technologies that people talked a lot about in the 90s, just were too expensive and didn't do enough. They provided a level of service that's similar to a lot of these products, but they cost a lot more, and so they really didn't take off. And so this was sort of the lay of the land as these Pico solar products began to take off. And so now I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about the role of technology innovation in this space and how that enabled this particular technology to emerge as an important one. And the most important set of innovations in this space are linked to light-emitting diode, or LED technology. This is a little bit of a complicated graph, but a useful one to understand. This shows on this axis the cost of LEDs. This is what's called the LED package price. So that's the LED itself plus the control circuit and heat sink that go with it. And it's normalized to dollars per 1,000 lumens of light output for the LEDs. And it's on a log scale. So you have $100, $10 per 1,000 lumens, $1 and 0. And on this axis, you have lumen efficacy. So it's essentially a measure of the efficiency of the LEDs in terms of the amount of light produced per watt of power input. And what you can see happening here is, and then we have two different types of LEDs. These are cool white LEDs, and then, excuse me, these are the cool ones, and these are the warmer ones. And that refers to the color temperature of the lights in terms of warmer or cooler light, so bluer or yellower colored light. But the overall trend is one of a trend in that direction over time. So that's a trend towards dramatically declining prices and increasing efficacy over time. And, excuse me? It is. And if you compare that to compact fluorescent technology, which was the main competitor in this space, compact fluorescents fall about here and have been pretty stable, while LEDs have moved in that direction and are expected to continue to move pretty rapidly in that direction. So the total effect has resulted in the last 5 or so years in a total increase or total gain when you consider both lumen efficacy gains and lower prices to a gain on the order of 8 to 15 times relative to where they started in 2009. So pretty substantial. So this is one of the most important parts of the story. Solar modules have also gotten cheaper over time, especially if you look back to the 1970s. But even if you're just looking in the last 10 or so years, there have been declines in the price of solar modules that have made a difference in this space. And then batteries have gotten a whole lot better. This graph shows lithium iron phosphate batteries here, and the incumbent sealed lead acid batteries here. And sealed lead acids are very stable technology, and lithium is an emerging one. Lithium iron phosphate batteries are much more durable, much more efficient in terms of storing electricity and giving it back, and more reliable over time. And so the fact that these have become cost competitive with the incumbent technology doesn't make the products cheaper, but it makes them much better and much more durable. And that's been an important part of the story. So these products all have lithium batteries inside them. And these are advances, again, that are not driven by this sector, but are instead driven by global mobile telephone use, global laptop use, and other things like that. But they can be picked up by this sector, and they have been. So these technology advances have been quite important, and it's useful to think about or look at how they fold into these particular products. So this graph shows the price of a product that's able to produce a certain amount of light, 120 lumens for 4 hours per day. And starting with 2009 technology for both a compact fluorescent product with a lead acid battery and an LED product with a lead acid battery as of 2009. And it shows the price broken down by the cost of the light source in yellow, then the cost of the battery in dark blue, then the cost of the solar module, and other costs associated with making that product. And you see that as of 2009, the compact fluorescent technology was actually a little bit better from a price perspective than the LED, but they were comparable. And you can see that the battery and the solar module make up a big part of the cost, except for the LED. The LED was also pretty expensive then, and that was also a big part of the cost. Moving up to 2012, because of reductions in price of the LEDs and gains in the efficacy of the LEDs, when the efficacy of the LED increases, the size of the solar module and the size of the battery that are needed for that product can get smaller and therefore less expensive. And so solar modules got cheaper over that time, but that's not the main reason that this is smaller than this. The main reason is that the LED to produce the same amount of light requires less power, and therefore the solar module can be smaller. So you have a pretty significant gain just in 3 years, almost half the cost to produce that product over that time period. And then moving forward to 2014, additional gains. Anything interesting you notice about that, other than the fact that it's cheaper? It's the battery, actually. Yeah, the battery went up. And that's because we switched from a nickel metal hydride battery, which was the common one around 2012, to a lithium battery. So the lithium batteries were a little more expensive, but they're way better. This is just the initial cost. If you're interested in the life cycle cost and how long this thing is going to last, this is a better product, and that's what manufacturers are moving towards. So moving to the lithium battery didn't decrease their cost, or hasn't quite yet, but they're able to include them and still reduce the overall cost because the LEDs have gotten so much more efficient and you can make everything smaller. And so that's been the trend. And then projecting forward to 2016, we see continued declines, again, primarily driven by what's happening with LEDs, but also a little bit with what's happening with the solar modules and the batteries. And if we look at this trend overall over time, and here I'm comparing 2009 to 2014 pricing, about 15% of the price reduction is associated with the fact that the solar modules have gotten cheaper, and 85% is associated with the LEDs getting cheaper and the LEDs getting more efficacious, and therefore allowing the battery and the PV module to be smaller. So this is really primarily driven by what's happening in the LED sector on the cost side, but the battery advances are also really important because they allow these products to just be way better from a durability perspective. All right, so that's the technology innovation story. Creative deployment and marketing and sales and financing strategies have also been a really important part of this overall story. And one of the really important stories here is around mobile banking. Anyone know what mobile banking is? You're familiar with that? The story here is that in places like Kenya, but also in a lot of other countries, it's becoming increasingly common for the mobile telephone sector to have a banking dimension. And so there are, in Kenya, thousands of kiosks around the country. This is one of this is the leading company. It's a company called M-Pesa, or it's a service called M-Pesa. Which means the M is for mobile, and Pesa means money in Swahili. So it's mobile money banking. If you deposit, you come to a kiosk like this, you put some money in cash, they'll credit your account. You can then use your mobile phone to manage your account, so you can transfer that to somebody else, a friend, a business that you need to make a payment to, your utility bill, whatever. Almost everybody in Kenya accepts mobile money that just gets transferred to their phone. And then if you need cash again, you just go to another kiosk, and they're able to look up your account and give you that cash. It's been an incredible innovation in banking. It's made banking available to a far wider fraction of the population than was previously true. And this Kenya has really been the leader globally in innovation in mobile banking, but a number of other countries are also involved in the use of mobile banking. And how does this relate to the off-grid lighting sector? Well, one of the things that's happened with in this sector is that people are starting to sell products on what's called a pay-as-you-go basis. And pay-as-you-go sales mean essentially it's similar to a form of microcredit or microlending, where you get the product and then you make a series of payments over time in order to pay that product off, so that you don't have to have all the money up front. In conventional microcredit-based systems, they have to evaluate your credit history, decide if they want to lend to you, and then they have to either you're good about making your payments, or if you're not good about making your payments, they have to have somebody who chases you and tries to find you and say, hey, make those payments. And that's a costly process to try and manage all of those payments. In a pay-as-you-go system, it's the same concept, but it's managed differently. This is a small solar home system product that uses pay-as-you-go technology. This is a solar module. It's got a couple of lights. It charges the mobile phone. It's got a portable light. But this is the heart of the system. And this thing has a mobile phone SIM card embedded in it. And so if you buy the system, this advertisement says you pay a deposit of about 3,000 Kenyan shillings, which is about $35. You pay a deposit, and then you pay 50 shillings per day for 365 days, and then you own the system. And you make those payments using mobile money. If you make the payment for that day, this thing receives a signal. You send the payment with your mobile phone to central computer. The central computer registers that payment and sends a signal back to this box, which is sitting in your house, and it says, oh, payment's been made. The system will work today. And if you don't make the payment, the system doesn't work. But it'll resume working as soon as you make the next payment. And so instead of the company having to manage a microcredit system where they have to chase you to make the payments and have to pay somebody to do that, in this case, you're basically prepaying if you're the customer for this service. If you don't pay, you just don't get it, and that's the incentive to continue making the payments. Now, these are still embedding a mobile phone chip in a product increases the cost of that product a little bit, but it doesn't increase it as much as the cost of having all of the staff people to manage microfinance. And that cost is continuing to come down, whereas the cost of managing microfinance is again fairly stable. And so the emergence of these pay-as-you-go systems it's really just been in the last 2 years, but this is a major thing that I think is a key driver going forward for making these systems affordable in the sense that you don't have to pay all the money up front. You can pay a little bit at a time, which is how people typically access money. And then beyond that, direct marketing sales have been an important part of this sector. There's a whole network in a number of countries which is very similar to the way that Tupperware or Avon products or a number of other things get sold, where you have these sales agents who live in a particular area and they don't have a storefront. They're just selling out of their house and selling to their own personal social networks. And that type of direct marketing has really driven awareness and sales about these products. And so there's been a lot of activity in that space. And then that's backed up by brick and mortar storefronts, which often have the after-sales service or the technicians who can go help with the system, et cetera. And so there's been a lot of work on that side as well that's driven access to this technology in this space. Okay, that was number 4. Number 5 is, and this is the last key area, is related to institutions that address market failures. And the basic idea here is that markets, for all of their pros and cons, can be an efficient way of delivering goods and services to people, but often market failures undermine the ability of that to happen. Actually, always. All markets have lots of failures in them. It's just a question of how severe are those market failures. And by market failure, I mean things like information asymmetries. If you're going to buy a used car, if you had perfect information about whether or not that car was good and was going to last, and whether or not the price was a fair one, it'd be pretty easy to decide which one to buy. But that's not typically how we operate. We typically don't have all of that information, and also it's not just a question of having not enough information. It's a question of asymmetric information. So the seller usually knows more about that car than you do, and so that creates a level of distrust. And I don't know how many of you've bought a used car in that circumstance, but that information asymmetry maybe sometimes makes you hesitate on whether or not you're going to make that purchase or not, because you're afraid you're going to get a lemon. And that same thing happens all over the place, but the degree of information that's available and the degree of asymmetry varies pretty widely. And so that can really play a big role in whether or not people are able or willing to buy something. If you're a bank, that asymmetry may influence your willingness to lend into the sector and to lend to people who want to sell these products and need to carry stock. It can influence every single part of how these things happen. And so finding ways of addressing these sorts of issues is a key part of the story. The other thing about markets is that they tend to be they tend to favor people who have more money. I mean, it's sort of fairly basic, but in a market-based scenario, wealthier people are in a better position because purchasing power is what drives the level of access, and that's just how markets generally work. But some of that can be at least partially mitigated with policies that are designed to address those things. That doesn't mean that policies are always designed in that way. In fact, they're often not, but it doesn't mean that they can't be. There have been a number of key innovations in this sector that have at least partially addressed some of these issues. One has been a strong focus on developing a product quality assurance framework intended to avoid information market failure in terms of people's knowledge about the quality of these products. The second is a big push to try and increase access to finance, not just for end consumers, but also throughout the supply chain, so that buyers of distributors of these products have access to working capital, so that they can carry stock, and manufacturers have access to finance, so that they can produce stock before and carry the cash flow until that money comes back. A third is access to market intelligence, especially for manufacturers and buyers. If you have manufacturers that are based in China and they're trying to sell into sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of times those manufacturers don't know anything about the markets. They don't know which products are the right ones to make. They don't know who the good distributors will be. There's just a lot of lack of information that inhibits activity in the sector. And so activities that help bridge that gap can be quite effective. Campaigns to increase end user awareness about these products and about which ones are good and how to make decisions about buying them have been a key activity. And then engagement with governments to try and set up policies that either favor the sector or at least don't create barriers to the sector have also been an important part of the story. So there have been activities in all of these arenas. On the question of equity of access, a lot of my interest in this space goes back to my PhD dissertation work, which was in the early 2000s, late 90s and early 2000s, focused on the Kenya solar market. And what I found there was that the Kenya solar market, a lot of systems were being sold, but most of the access, most of the ownership of those systems was by the top, say, third or 40% of the world population by wealth. So 90% of the systems were owned by the upper 40%. And these were for systems that cost something on the order of $200 to $600. They maybe had a 20-watt solar module and could power a few lights. And so at that time, I was interested in trying to figure out how do we address this? How do we make energy access available to a wider fraction of the population? And one way of doing that is with subsidy policy or other programs like that. Another way of doing it is by trying to figure out how do you make things less expensive, and so that a wider fraction of the population can afford them. And a lot of the focus of this sector has been on that latter side of things. I'm going to skip this just in the interest of time, but the short story is that a lot of these lower cost products, while they provide pretty low levels of service, are very affordable and accessible to pretty low income people. So these systems are growing rapidly. We've talked about that. More than 10 million of these products have been sold in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia since 2009. But there's also a pretty large market for low quality products. So these are some of the good quality ones. There's a lot of cheap junk out there as well, and people have a hard time distinguishing between them. And so one of the things that was recognized early on is that there's a real need for a quality assurance system or a consumer protection system to help address that and to help people make good informed purchasing decisions. And so the Lighting Africa program, which is a joint international finance World Bank initiative, was launched back in 2009 in order to address some of these things. The strategy really was around trying to build institutions to address market failures in this space with a focus in these 5 areas, which match the ones that I just talked about: quality assurance, consumer awareness, access to finance, market intelligence for the manufacturers, and policy and regulatory reform. The piece of it that I've been most active in, and a whole set of people here at Humboldt State have been active in, is around the quality assurance piece of that. But this is one piece of a broader program. Lighting Africa, which was launched with pilot activities in Kenya, has since grown to have activities in about a dozen different countries. And in 2012, the Lighting Asia program, which had a similar framework, was launched. And there are now activities in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan associated with Lighting Asia. And there's also a Lighting Pacific program with activities in Papua New Guinea. That's a fairly small part of the program that was just recently launched. All of this work also involved collaboration with the U.S. Department of Energy, but it's primarily a World Bank Group initiative. The work that we do, that we're involved in here at Humboldt State, is in a program that's called Lighting Global. And Lighting Global is just a framework that supports the Lighting Africa, Lighting Asia, and Lighting Pacific programs with cross-cutting activities, which is what things like the quality assurance are associated with. This is not a solo venture. A lot of partners involved, a lot of different organizations, some small, some large. And we are also, as part of this effort, there's a fairly large network of test laboratories that are involved in testing these products. So there are test labs here at Humboldt State, but also in Shenzhen, China, in Germany. This is a lab in upstate New York. This is New Delhi, and in Nairobi, Kenya. And so we work with labs in all of these places. I don't want you to read all these names, but this is a sort of a list of a lot of the key people involved in this sector. And I put this up just to highlight how many of these people are at Humboldt State. So these are people who are working here at Humboldt State, and these are alum of our program who have gone on to be consultants working with this team based elsewhere. And so a lot of people involved, but Humboldt State is pretty well represented in the effort. The program, the quality assurance program, which is the activity that we lead from here at Humboldt State, really has 3 key parts to it. One is developing test methods and quality standards for evaluating these type of products. And there we have established, dating back to 2008, a set of test methods and a set of quality standards. They've been revised a number of times with a lot of stakeholder input over time, and lots of people in this room have been involved in those efforts. And the test methods that are used by the program have now been adopted by the International Electrotechnical Commission, which might not sound like much if you're not familiar with them, but it's the leading international standards organization for electrical appliances. So this has now become the global standard for evaluating small-scale solar lighting products. This is the foundation of the program, and then we use those test methods and the standards to test products that are submitted by manufacturers on a commercial basis to the program. So if somebody wants their product tested, they submit it, they pay a fee that covers the cost of that testing, and that testing takes place at one of these 6 labs. If the product passes those tests and meets the standards, then they get a specification sheet and a verification letter that's essentially a certificate that indicates that their product has been independently verified. and that goes up on a website. So that's not a consumer-facing way of communicating this information, but it is a way of communicating to distributors who want to buy these in bulk, to bulk purchasers, to financial institutions and governments that this is a certified product. And this setting up something like this involves lots of mundane work, lots of interesting work. It can be a bit of a daily grind, but it's a really important service to ensure the quality of these products and to provide information to the buyers across the sector so that the whole market can function. From a manufacturer's point of view, they submit their product. There's sort of a two-step testing process that they might go through, although lots of them now can bypass that and just go through a single step. If their product passes, as I just said, they get the verification letter and the spec sheet up on the website, but they also, if they pass a few other additional checks, are eligible to receive business services from the World Bank Group, so support for their business, which might mean connections to distributors who might be good for their business, and access to a whole range of other support services that can help get them started and to expand their markets. This is just a quick summary of the program highlights for the quality assurance program. I won't go through all of them, but a few quick things. We've tested, not just here, but across all of the lab network, more than 120 products that have been submitted on a commercial basis over the last 5 years. Worked with more than 40 companies, and about 50 products currently meet the standards and are listed on the website, and more than 10 million of these products have been sold globally that have gone through this program and have received that quality assurance. Yep.
Can you back up the previous slide? Was there if they don't pass the quality screening, is there what happens then? Is there support or feedback?
Yeah, mainly we give them feedback and recommendations for what they might do. If they want some back and forth, we'll give them advice about what they might do to address the problem. Sometimes the problems are pretty minor and they're able to fix them fairly quickly. Sometimes they're pretty substantial, and in some cases they never come back to us because they're not able to muster the resources to do that. But in many cases, that support does result in them eventually passing. So it can become an iterative process. Sure. And so this quality assurance effort has been foundational for the growth of the market. And you can see here a trajectory where setting up the quality assurance program and having it take off. And I have this, and this is product sales that are being shown here. And I have this triangle here because we don't really know which way things are going to go. But in the absence of the quality assurance program, my guess is that it's going to be towards the lower end of that trajectory, because the quality assurance program is important not just for end consumers. In fact, it's probably not even visible to most of the end consumers. Who it's really important to are the distributors, the banks, and the microfinance institutions. And so companies that want to get access to a loan, in many cases, the banks are now insisting that their products have to be quality assured. And so it's really only the companies that have the good quality products that are able to access that money. Because the banks have an interest, they only want a loan for products that are going to actually work. Element though, the developing consumer awareness. These are pictures from a consumer awareness campaign that took place in Kenya in 2012 and 13. A whole series of shows. Those are sort of the dramatic pictures, but there's also a lot of radio spots. They even worked information about quality assurance and these sorts of products into a local soap opera that took place over a season. And there was a whole series of scenarios. It's sort of a comedy show called Makutano Junction that promoted the idea that these might be a good substitute for kerosene lighting, and that you should only go for the good ones, and you'd be really sorry if you buy a bad one. And this is how you could figure out which ones are good.
You all have a better social life.
Yeah, all kinds of things. It's awesome. What's that?
A logo on the product?
There's not a logo on the product, and I can talk about that, but maybe that's a fantastic question for the Q&A session.
Are those beans or rice?
These are beans.
Beans.
That might be rice.
Looks like the best incentive ever.
Well, that's just somebody. That's just because this was happening in a market. This is somebody's stall. And there have been activities, of course, around trying to make banks aware of this sector and why they should be comfortable lending into it, et cetera. So I want to close with a question, which is, what about larger systems? Can some of what has happened with these smaller systems also enable larger systems that allow people to have more lights, more appliances, and maybe even support activities for small businesses? Can some of this translate into these larger systems? And the key for this to happen, I think, is related to energy efficiency. The key for making these larger systems affordable is efficiency. So this shows power consumption for conventional appliances, and I'll show the super efficient appliances that are now available next. But a compact fluorescent light that produces a certain amount of light, about 600 lumens, maybe consumes 8 watts. If you want a color TV, 19-inch color TV, about 75 watts. Typical fan might consume about 10 watts. These are just a few conventional appliances that are out there. If you look at sort of best available technology out there, you can make modest gains on the lighting side, dramatic gains for televisions, and pretty nice gains on fans. There's lots of other appliances that you can look at where moving to the most efficient appliances available can make a big difference in terms of how much power is needed. And the reason that's important is because if you're going with the most efficient appliances, the solar module can be smaller, the battery can be smaller, and that's what shrinks the size of the systems and makes them more affordable. So again, the graph similar to the one I showed earlier for the Pico solar products. This is the cost of a solar home system that'll provide energy for 4 lights, a 19-inch color TV, a radio, and mobile phone charging, where I'm showing the cost of the lights, which barely even show up in the graph, cost of the battery, the PV module, the balance of system associated with the solar system, and then the cost of the appliances other than the lights here at the end. And this is all for a certain level of use, which I've outlined here. So this is 2009 with standard appliances. If you move to 2014 with standard appliances, it's gotten cheaper, largely because solar modules have gotten cheaper. And so there have been some gains just associated with that. But if you look at the most efficient appliances available, and you consider the higher cost of those appliances in the story, you get another drop. So if you use super efficient appliances, some of the best available out there, even considering the higher cost of those appliances, you can get another pretty substantial decline in the cost of these systems. And so it's really, I think, looking at energy efficiency for DC appliances, direct current appliances that can be used with these systems, and packaging that together with these sorts of systems that will enable making these larger systems also more affordable. What can be done to make this happen? There are, I think, a number of policy measures. This won't just happen, I think, on its own. A number of policy measures that are needed. One is quality assurance needs to be extended into these larger systems because the same set of issues are prevalent in that sector and with those products. And that's something we're working on. We're about halfway through an effort that's being led by a team here at the Schatz Energy Research Center working together with a group in Germany called the Fraunhofer Institute for Solar Energy Systems to develop this, to extend that framework. Second is that usually solar systems are sold separately from the appliances, and so finding ways of packaging the appliances together with the system so that you get the benefit of super efficient appliances is quite important. And we're seeing that some solar companies are now starting to do that. So this is an example of a small solar home system kit. It's a bit bigger than these and a bit more expensive, but they're setting it up so that it's packaged together with a TV, with a set of lights. I think there are only 2 of them here, but there are 4 in this kit. It comes with a table fan and some other appliances, and packaging all of that together has allowed them to take advantage of the super efficiency and making these more affordable. And then the appliance manufacturers, the manufacturers of the TVs and the lights, they don't really know about this sector, and they don't know who the solar home system sellers are in most cases. And the solar home system companies don't necessarily have good connections with the appliance manufacturers. And so trying to bring those people together and make those connections is another important part of the story. Here we've thought a little bit about lights and TVs and fans, but lots of other appliances, these same sorts of things can apply. Refrigerators, water pumps, a variety of different things. High efficiency, I think, is something that can make a big difference in this sector. So just to wrap up, these small-scale off-grid lighting and Pico solar products are emerging as a form of access to energy in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Sales have grown really rapidly, and that has improved the level of access to services for tens of millions of people. This is driven by all of the factors we just talked about, certainly demand, but also technology innovation, innovation in the sales and distribution and financing of these systems, and creating these institutions that seek to overcome market failures in the sector. There are pretty significant benefits associated with a transition from the incumbent technologies to these technologies, and I think that there's a possibility of extending this from these very small systems up to some larger systems going forward. But there are a number of things that have to happen for that to really work. And with that, that's what I got. So I think we have some time for questions. Happy to answer them. But let me get a drink first. Yep.
So what I got from this, a lot of market share. And assuming we all are trying to communicate with each other. But what my biggest concern is going from small scale to big scale. What you call conspiracy or non-conspiracy, at the end of the day, we need oil to make these products. So how do the oil producers come into play with manufacturers if they don't really know who's going to, what it's affecting? I personally know a friend of mine who owns an oil company, who his dad owns an oil company in Nigeria. And he tells me all these crazy stories about the place. And I'm like, whoa, as an activist, I'm just like, is this really going to help him? Is this really going to help the environment? How is this really going to work making plastic? So how do you calculate?
This is primarily where the oil sector is linked into this story. It's not that certainly the plastics are part of what's happening there, but this is a $20 billion industry, and it's the oil industry that's producing that kerosene. Kerosene is one of the things that gets produced in the context of oil refining, and so one of the things we've done is an analysis of these sorts of products, looking at the embedded energy in the products and how that compares to the amount of energy and the amount of fossil fuel that's consumed by these things over the lifetime. And if you look at the amount of fossil energy that's embedded in the production of these products, and you compare that to how much you use with these things over the life, the payback in terms of the fossil energy that's in these compared to the avoided fossil from using these is on the order of 4 or 5 months.
Did that go into the calculation of the variations of battery and...
You're talking about the cost?
Yeah, the Does that go into all of that?
I-
I'm assuming so. I don't know. I'm here one of the computer students, so.
It doesn't go in a certain sense, but it does in another. That's just part of the price of these products. Yep.
Has the light ever been a reference, and has there been any difficulty incorporate that in, or is it mostly? I noticed that light's a pretty white light, and has preference ever driven away any customers?
So, yeah. So what you're referring to is the color of these lights, and certainly some LEDs have a fairly bluish or whitish tint to them, and not as warm as maybe an incandescent light or as a candle or a wick lamp.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is all about personal preference, but many people prefer warmer light over what we call cooler light or whiter or bluer light. Some of these have fairly whitish light. The color temperature of these has improved quite a bit over time. Some of the products, this one works for me. This has a bit of a warmer light, and so you can get LEDs that are fairly warm color temperature, and they're a little bit more expensive, but they're starting to become less expensive. They're starting to be used more widely, and there certainly are people who prefer the warmer lights across all kinds of income levels and cultures, and so that certainly does come into play. I think even the whiter or even slightly bluish lights tend to get preferred by most people over this light. But if they have a choice, many people will prefer the slightly warmer color temperatures, and that's something that people pay attention to in the industry. It is one of the things we measure, and it ends up on our spec sheets. So if there's a distributor that's interested in carrying a particular product, they can have access to that information.
So it's being
Yeah. And our thinking is that it's not our job as a quality assurance program to tell people what that color temperature should be. Our job is to tell them what it is, and then let them decide what they want to do to that. Yes.
Does the problem of the more lucrative electronic scrap market manifest itself to a various degree?
In the sense.
Say a whole bunch of them get donated to a village, but like the going price for electronic scrap is better, so people turn around and just jump in for money. Does that problem manifest itself?
Possibly. I don't know if there's the electronic scrap market that people would be reselling them for, but certainly if people are receiving these as a giveaway from some sort of a donor program, there may be lots of people who will resell them just because they value money more than that product in that circumstance. But that's actually not the driving force in what's happening. Most of these are being sold in retail markets where people are buying them directly with their own money. And so in the giveaway sector, or a giveaway model, that can become an issue. And there certainly are a number of those circumstances out there. But most of what we're seeing is people buying them themselves. John?
So you describe this mostly as expanding in a sector where there seems to be little likelihood in the foreseeable future of grid power moving in. So I'm wondering though, especially where you ended up with, the slightly larger systems, do you see the potential for these sort of systems to be able to compete or forestall a grid system that would be much more carbon-based and so forth, or is it just, given the alternative, if a grid were to move in, is this just unable to be attractive to most people?
The answer to that is a little bit complex and depends on the circumstance, because a lot of places where the grid gets expanded, people tend to prefer grid electricity if they can get it, because it allows you to do a lot more. It tends to be fairly inexpensive once you actually have it, although getting the connection can be expensive. But the grid's not always reliable. So just because you have it doesn't mean that it's there all the time. So one of the very common circumstances is that people will get access to the grid, and they'll still want these because there's a lot of power outages, and these work really well when the power is out. And so a lot of sales of these things is not just in off-grid areas, it's also in areas where the grid is unreliable. And so that's one part of an answer to what you're saying. I think in terms of, I can't imagine anybody deciding not to go with the grid just because they had one of these. And I can't imagine anybody who was thinking about extending the grid being worried about the fact that people already own these lights, and therefore they're not going to be interested in the grid. That's not really the story. And I think that's even true with these larger systems for the most part, because these larger systems, we're talking systems that might be able to power a number of lights, and they might be able to power TVs and some basic electronics and things like that. But it's not going to help with grain grinding. It's not going to help with irrigation for a farm. There's a whole range of applications that the grid can enable that go well beyond what these things can do. And so in many ways, this is, if eventually we're looking at grid electricity on decadal timescales for people in these areas, maybe it's 30 years off, maybe it's 10 years off, these can play a key role in improving people's lives in that interim. And there may be places where it will be decades, and others where it'll be 1 decade. But I think either way, there's real value in it for people in that circumstance. Yes.
What kind of shops are these sold in?
A variety. So there are standard electronics brick and mortar shops that carry these things, and usually very few of these shops are specialty shops that just carry this stuff. Often it's an electronic shop, or sometimes it's a grocery store or a supermarket, or because this isn't enough of a business in a particular town to have that be your only product. So often these are 5 or 10% of the sales stream of a business. So electronic shops are probably the most common. That's for the brick and mortar stores, but a lot of these products are sold through direct marketing sales. And one of the really common models in East Africa, in Kenya and Tanzania, is school teachers become salespeople for these in their communities. And for whatever reason, school teachers have really become one of the key sets of sellers of these. Maybe it's because they're a little bit more aware of these sorts of products. They were educated in an urban area and then moved out to a rural area, so they know about these things. They're trying to get a little bit more income because a teacher salary is not awesome, even in rural Africa. And and they're thought leaders in their community. People trust them, and so in a lot of cases, it's not just teachers, but teachers have become a major direct marketing sales vendor for these sorts of things. And then there are other sales models that are out there as well. Microfinance institutions that have networks for financing a whole range of different things. This is one of the types of products that they'll finance. And so the sales agents associated with microfinance organizations are sometimes also the salespeople for these. There's a variety of different things out there.
And then segue into the logo
Yep.
question.
Yeah, so
I have a hunch I know what the answer is. It's counterfeit, but
that's part of the story. So I think the question is, wouldn't it be useful to be able to put a sticker or a seal on these products that said this one is quality verified, so that not only the distributors and the banks and the others know about the certification, but also somebody who's buying the end product can look for that sticker and say, oh, that's the quality verified product. And that is a really powerful way of communicating that kind of information in this kind of a context. But it's no small thing to make that work. And so we haven't pursued that primarily because we don't have the resources to do that kind of a thing. The amount of, from multiple levels. One is that if you want to get a sticker to be recognized so that it's effective, you have to build a brand around that sticker that people are going to recognize. And if you're trying to do that in Kenya, you probably need to spend millions of dollars to build that brand. If you're trying to do that all across sub-Saharan Africa and in South Asia, you would need to spend tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. And if I had $100 million, that is not what I would spend it on if what I was trying to do was increase energy access. There's a lot of other things that need to be done before that will have higher impact than all of that advertising money to get people to recognize that brand. And on top of that, if we were effective the first thing that would happen would be that companies that make low-quality products would just duplicate that sticker and put it on their products, and that would just confuse the matter. So dealing with that counterfeiting issue is complicated, and it's complicated enough in a place like the United States or Europe where you can go to court and sue people, and just policing that in even being aware of people counterfeiting across dozens or hundreds of countries when we have a pretty small set of resources to do that is beyond what we can do, and then being able to legally force somebody to not do that is just impossible. And so while I think it would be quite valuable in one sense, we've decided that that's really not the strategy we want to be able to take, or we can take on. Yep.
I was wondering if you maybe just say a little bit more about the pay-as-you-go or Pico technology, just how long that's been around, how well it's working. It just sounds intriguing to me. I'm just curious if there are issues with it, or you see that as playing a bigger role. And are there other types of products other than these sort of energy access stuff where that's being used, or?
So in this sector, it's been around 2 or 3 years. It's very new. I think it's going to be huge. It really, I think, enables the possibility of selling these systems at prices that match the cash flow that people have, and to make them affordable to people. And the cost of doing the pay-as-you-go dimension of it is going to get cheaper pretty fast. And so I think it's going to be one of the key things happening in this space. Are there issues with it? Sure, there are lots of challenges, technical challenges, logistical challenges with all of these sorts of things. So yes, there are issues. Buying this system ends up costing certainly more than if you buy it upfront in cash, because it has all of that stuff embedded into it. And so there is also just an overall cost of the system over time issue. If you have the money up front to buy it in cash, then you're going to pay less. But most people just don't have that money at that up front. And getting a loan costs even more because you have to pay interest on that loan. Is it being used in other sectors? It probably is, but it seems like a lot of the innovation has happened in this particular sector. And I think it's starting to filter, or will start to filter into others. But it's also linked to, this is in some ways building off of work that's happened in, for example, grid electricity in urban areas in a number of African countries where prepaid meters have become a big deal instead of postpaid meters. We have postpaid meters, so we use the electricity and then we pay the bill afterwards. But it's really common in a number of countries now to have prepaid meters where people prepay for the electricity, they use it until their payment is up, and then they pay again. And so this, in some ways, is building off of that.
Thanks.
Yep.
What about the maintenance of these products? So let's say some guy buys them out in Africa, and then let's say he has it for so long, a year or something, and the bulb goes out. Who does he go to, and can he trust that person? Are they going to have the right quality products? And has that been thought about in this program? Or
it has. I wouldn't say that we've addressed it fully, but and I think there's a couple of dimensions to that. One is some of these products are repairable. There is a growing network of technicians, and it's not just technicians serving this sector, but the same people who repair your cell phone, who repair other electronics, are starting to repair these types of products. Some of them do it really well, some of them do it less well, so there's a lot of variety there. But we spent a fair bit of time trying to understand how that works, especially in Kenya and Tanzania, and try to get a sense of what skills those technicians have and what tools they have available and how well they're doing, and then trying to feed that information back to some of the companies that are selling these products so that they either can take that into consideration when they design their products, or take that into consideration as they develop their own after-sale service models for the sector. This is a pretty new sector, and so I wouldn't say that is something that the companies have fully figured out at this point.
Right.
but it is something that they're interested in working on. I think the other part of it is that a lot of these products come with warranties. In order to get to meet our quality standards, they have to provide at least a 1-year warranty on the product. Many of the companies are now providing 2-year warranties. And so if it breaks within that time period and it's a warranty-related issue rather than you ran over it with your tractor, then there is some degree of warranty coverage. Warranties are a complicated thing also because it's difficult to determine if a company is servicing their warranties properly, and it's difficult to service them if you are a company in terms of being able to make sure that spares are available all throughout the supply chain, et cetera. So I think there's certainly a lot of growth to happen in the sector, but it's an issue that people care about and are thinking about. And there's a lot of things that companies can do in the design of their products that can facilitate that. If you make the battery so that it's easily replaceable and you make sure that the batteries are available, that can make a big difference. That matters especially for the more expensive products because a battery is a pretty significant fraction of the cost, but also matters for others. Yes?
Are you all in touch with tribal entities in Humboldt or other parts of the U.S. who may have a lot of community members off-grid and low income?
I wouldn't say that we're directly engaged on this particular area. At the Schatz Lab, we do work with a number of the tribes in the region, not necessarily on these things, but on other projects. I do know that there's a lot of interest in this space, and I do know that some of the companies who sell these things have been engaged in that sector, but we haven't worked so much directly there in relationship to these sorts of things. Mostly we worked on other issues related to energy and energy infrastructure with some of the local Native American tribes.
So you've already got the relationship.
We do. Other questions? Yep.
I just wondered, for the segment of the population that can only afford the 10-cent plan,
Yeah.
how does these components affect their income? What is the percentage of their income?
It can be significant, but so this is a 10 cent to buy the lamp, but it might cost 5 cents a day to fuel it. And so that money adds up pretty fast. And so it still is, I mean, that's still getting cash flow in really small increments. And to buy this, you have to save $7. So that's still several months worth of saving, but it is, and so I wouldn't say that everybody can do that, but a number of people can make that investment and then the payback is pretty rapid. The other thing we're seeing is that pay-as-you-go is starting, it's mostly focused on products that are up here that cost more than $100 and finding a way to make that more affordable. We're finding that it's also starting to move down to the lower cost products. And so we're seeing one product that it retails if you buy it for cash for maybe $11 or $12, but there's a way of buying it through pay-as-you-go in a way that you end up paying a total of maybe $18 or $20, but you do it in small payments of on the order of $1 a week over a period of time, and through a pay-as-you-go mechanism. And sales of that are just starting to skyrocket.
So that would be kind of more relative to the cost that we're spending already on kerosene.
Yeah, it's maybe a little more, but it's not that much more, and then the payback is, because they're still not having to pay for this. So the companies are, in many cases, that's their target is, can we get the cost of these things down to how much you would pay for kerosene in a week, plus the mobile phone charging fees if you have a phone in or charging it. If I, as a seller, I can match that, then it's going to be affordable to a lot of people. You had a question earlier.
I actually have more comments than a question.
Okay.
Like, we were fortunate enough to get some donations from the lab last summer to send to a school in Thailand. And they just called me like a few weeks ago saying that it worked really well and they really appreciated it. And like, just like you said, like when people are donating, why won't they describe it? It's like for them, like it worked for them when they're on grid, but when the lights out, when there's like a rain or monsoon, so like they need that extra help. I'm just saying, like we take stuff for granted, like electricity.
Great, thanks for that comment. I'm glad to hear that you got that positive feedback. Do you know you had a comment or a
Yeah, I
question?
was curious if in your experience with this work, if there was any efforts or campaigns led by the kerosene industry to stifle the solar industry or specifically the Lighting Africa, Asia initiative?
Not that I know of, but it doesn't mean that they're not concerned. I think for the most part, this stuff is it's only starting to become big enough that they might be concerned. So in the early days, it was so small that, I mean, they're a $20 billion industry. I don't think they were paying attention. Now, it's the last year or two where it started to become big enough that they might notice. But I don't know of any particular stories where that's been a big issue. I can say that one of the major sellers of kerosene in sub-Saharan Africa is Total, which is the French oil company, and they've become one of the major distributors of these products. I think thinking they're happy to if there's going to be a switch away from kerosene, they may as well be selling that also. And so they've been one of the companies that's been selling those sorts of products. Yep.
Is that company you just mentioned an LLC, limited liability company?
I don't know, but they're one of the major global oil companies, and this, of course, is a very tiny fraction of their business. They're mainly an oil company, but what they're doing is selling these sorts of products through their petrol station network, which is a pretty extensive distribution network. I think we should probably wrap up. I can maybe take one more question. No?
This is not a question, but just a comment based on my limited experience in this area in UP. That most of the time people buy these products, but at the same time they also keep kerosene on wigland.
Yeah.
Because these products fail to tell you that whether they are to be charged or not. And if there's a LED, then definitely they tell you the product is charged. But even then, I don't know how long it's going to work after fully charged, whether 2 hours or 3 hours.
Sure.
Whereas in big lamp, I always know based on the kerosene amount.
Yeah.
But in the pay-as-you-go system, I certainly know that for how long I have the money in it. So it's very, very important for pay-as-you-go system to come down to these smaller system and start bringing those technologies in the smaller system.
Right.
Otherwise, people will buy these systems, but still use kerosene, and those problems she wanted to solve will remain.
They will, but they'll be still reduced. I mean, and this is something we see in Kenya because when people buy these things, you're right, they don't throw away the kerosene or throw away those lamps. They keep them because there might be some day when that's just like if you have grid electricity, even in a place like Humboldt County, you might still have a drawer with some candles in it for that day when the power goes out, and the power from these is going to go out much more often, and so people will keep that backup. But that doesn't mean they're using it nearly to the same extent. And so to the degree that there's a reduction, there's still a reduction in some of those issues. Anyway, we should probably wrap up. Thank you.